Good morning, my fellow Canadians. I was reading today's Sun, and it was mentioning the rash of jewelry store robberies in the Toronto East End, predominantly. Armed robberies. Young gentlemen of color coming in with firearms and robbing jewelers. And it led me down the same thing I've spoken about in the past, that people with actual logic and intelligence are trying to put forward, that the current liberal firearms legislation, this ban on handguns, sale, transfer, everything, is being put forward as a measure of public safety. I don't understand how people that normally I would think intelligent people can be gaslit so willingly by a government that tells you that the facts are not factual and that the truth is not true and that what you see is not what you see. And people believe this. And I have to wonder, what kind of a world do you live in where you can willfully blind yourself to fact? I, unfortunately, and like very many of my contemporaries, I never had that luxury. I had to face truth, as unpleasant as it was, because that's the only way I could deal with it. I don't understand. I really do not understand what kind of a world these people live in. I understand the term cognitive dissonance. I understand what it means, but I've never seen it so evident as I am seeing now. Fact. Current fact. Brazil relaxed its requirements for honest citizens to arm themselves. Basically, to get a CCW, for those who don't know, is carry a concealed weapon. To get a CCW permit in Brazil, basically, if you're a good citizen with no criminal record or history of mental illness or negative interactions with the authorities, you can go to the police station and you can get an authorization to carry a concealed weapon. Now, to the loony liberals, you'd hear the rhetoric about blood in the streets and Wild West. This is what happened in Florida when they relaxed the carry laws for their citizens in the face of a rising crime rate. Well, what happened in Brazil? Blood in the streets, murder rates spiked, bodies lying helter-skelter hither and yon. No. Excuse me. The crime rate dropped 30% in the first month. That is fact. Criminals are afraid of armed citizens, not the cops. Fact. Am I proposing that Canadian citizens should have the right to arm themselves? You're damned right. Because the evidence is out there. Real, solid, factual evidence, not theories, not studies, not our polls have shown. None of that garbage. Fact. I've said this before. Unfortunately, there are trite phrases and people dismiss them because they're trite. But because they're trite or hackneyed does not make them false. And one of my favorites is making good people helpless will not make bad people harmless. This is basic common sense. But the anti-firearms lobby and the liberals push a narrative that has no relation to reality, to real world. events, real world consequences. Excuse me. So I sit there and what does it take? What will it take? We need a change of government. I mean, this is a given. The Liberals have led us down a path of national self-destruction. The economy's in the toilet. Life has gotten harder for Canadians. Don't get me going on the energy sector. In spite of everything, they still push the same narrative. And again, you get the people who support them blindly touting the same narrative of the government and the mainstream media. Again, in the face of all evidence to the contrary, they choose to believe the lie. That for me and for most of the people I know, like I said, is an unaffordable luxury. I would have it written into law that you are allowed to defend yourself with lethal force if you are confronted by an armed assailant. I don't care if it's an armed robber, home invasion, carjacker, someone comes on your property and is trying to steal your pickup or your ATV and they are armed and you shoot them, no criminal prosecution. But again, the justice system, under the guise of liberalism, has made us Canadians unsafer. I'm seeing all the time in the paper, so and so was arrested with a firearm, and they're charged with violating the terms of their probation. They're under a firearms ban, and they're arrested again with a firearm, out on bail on firearms offenses. My brother called into a radio talk show. Now, I see no sense to this personally because we all know the methodology of a radio talk show. If you call in, they won't give you a fair hearing. If they don't like what you're saying, they just disconnect you. Well, he brought up a point. I can't recall who it was. He brought up a point where several young men had been killed, gang shootout. Turns out these kids who were killed, were on bail, out on bail for firearms offenses. And my brother pointed out, rightfully, that if they had been in jail where they belonged, they wouldn't have been shot. Well, of course, click, dial tone, and you're cut off. Is that wrong? I don't think so. That's a crackdown on firearms offenses. Put them in jail and keep them there until their trial. And when they're tried, give them a sentence commensurate with the crime and the public distaste for the crime and the need for public safety. No more slap on the wrist sentences. Put these people away. Get them out of society. I don't care if it's a young offender. I don't care if a kid's 12, 13 years old and they've got a firearm. I made this point before and people have brought up, and I can't understand this. Well, it's only a child. Okay. So if you're shot and murdered by a child, are you less dead? Is it more acceptable then to be traumatized or killed by a kid pointing a firearm at you than it is by an adult? How is this even a thing? I can't understand this sort of perverted logic that comes out of this. And this is from liberals who fail to grasp the reality. Kids today are not the kids of my youth. There are kids out there, the thug life, the gang life. I'm not going to get into the sociological causes. I am not a sociologist. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm just a guy who's been around the block long enough to see reality. The reality is our laws have to be rewritten. We need a clearly defined castle doctrine. Your right to life, your right to self-protection, your rights to self-defense, your right to protection of both yourself, your family, and your property. Well, he shouldn't be shot for stealing a pickup. Really? Really? If that pickup is your sole means of transportation, transporting your family, or it's part of your employment to feed your family, you shouldn't have the right to protect your property? But no. And this is where I think we've gone so far off the rails. A very good friend of mine pointed out the left has seized the center position. There's no longer a centrist position. If you don't adopt leftist mentality, leftist thinking, you're dismissed as a right-wing radical, a homophobe, uh, all the pejoratives that come out, uh, justified or not, and in many cases not. You will be insulted for this, and I'll probably get flamed for this. But I would sit down with anybody with the nerve to try to hit me on a counter narrative. Bring it, and I'll blow you out of the water with facts and truth and logic. I'd love to see a safer Canada, and I know how it could be achieved, and not through liberal theory, but through fact. So, my fellow Canadians, have a good day. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and watch out. This is not a safe society anymore.